This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Tonight, I reflect on their struggle, their determination, and the strength of their vision to see what can be unburdened by what has been. And that is from 2nd Kamala 420. It's 420 because I don't know if you know this, but Kamala Harris, once hanging out in the 80s somehow, was hanging out smoking weed, listening to Tupac and Biggie Smalls, even though both of those guys weren't professional rappers, even at that time. Guys, we live in the least serious time, maybe in human history. You know what I was supposed to be doing today? Not this. I wasn't supposed to be writing a podcast this morning and now recording it. But the news cycle is such that even Albert Mueller, who takes off every July, he can't just take off July. He can't just go fish. He can't just go read some books or write some books. He has to keep coming in and ruining his schedule to continue to talk about the stuff that we're seeing that is absolutely unprecedented. And so I'm very much so doing the same. This was not supposed to be the episode for today. We're having to push some interviews around and do that because we are just constantly seeing things left and right. Really, guys, just think about this. Just over a week ago, Donald Trump was almost murdered. He was shot in the head, but he was almost shot in the head so bad that it would have turned into a canoe. And that isn't even in the news cycle anymore. But guys, I promise we will get to everything that has gone on in the last 24 hours, 48 hours. But I did just want to give a quick thank you and do a couple of announcements. A quick thank you to our donors for your patience and for your action. I talked about on the last episode where I talked about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. I talked about the situation going on with our credit card processor. I challenge you guys to become monthly donors. Current monthly donors for you to move over to our new platform. And I went ahead and did that. If you want the long, full-on explanation, I sent out an email to everybody on our email list, but I also talked about it on last Tuesday's episode, so you can check that out. But just thank you, everyone, for doing that. Also, it's been brought to my attention. I need to do a little bit more research on this, but it looks like there might be a little bit of shadow banning going on with our show and with our Instagram, because I keep running into people that are saying, and I've even noticed it myself, that Apple Podcasts is just unfollowing my show on your feed. And so basically you might normally see my feed, you might normally see my new episodes pop up, and then all of a sudden it's not popping up anymore. So guys, specifically if you're on Apple Podcasts, make sure that you're still following the show and that it's automatically downloading, because that's an interesting thing. And then also on Instagram, I had some people say that I was being automatically unfollowed. Their profiles were unfollowing me, and that people weren't able to refollow me for a little bit. And so obviously these things never happen on Democrat people that are blue check mark people or liberal people that are blue check mark people, but it's happening to us. If you're noticing that, please shoot us a message. Let us know. We're going to see if we can get to the bottom of this, which I assume that we won't be able to. But we do have an exciting announcement before we get to the clown world stuff that we live in. We're looking to expand the Undaunted.Life team. And so this is a special announcement just to you guys that listen to the show, because that's part of the whole deal. It's not just something that we're putting out there. We're not putting it out there on all these other different websites, but we need someone to help us with our social media. And so we're looking to expand our team to include that person. And we want someone that's leaning forward. And in terms of what we're looking for, we want someone that's sold out to the Undaunted.Life mission. So we want someone like you listening to this right now that is sold out to our mission to equip men around the globe to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. We don't just want some random slappy that's, good at social media or understands algorithms or something like that. We want somebody that's dedicated to what we're wanting to do. But also, we want somebody that has social media professional experience, not just somebody that is a consumer of social media and maybe they've made some cute memes here or there. We want someone that's actually done this, whether you work individually for yourself or whether you work for a larger company or agency, that's fine. And we're also only looking for U.S. citizens, because I've been reached out to by a bunch of random people that are in India or Pakistan or different places like that, and they're wanting to be a part of this. But we want to help, solidify the American worker. And so we want to help, or we want to get help from somebody that is here. So guys, if that is you, if that represents you, if you're sold out to our mission, if you've got experience doing this professionally and you're a United States citizen, there is a link in our show notes, but it is Undaunted.Life/social. There's a short form on there where you can give us a little bit of information about yourself and let us see some of your work, but Undaunted.Life/social. If this isn't you, but you know someone that would be good at this, make sure you give them that link, Undaunted.Life/social. So no quick hitters today, because all we're going to be talking about is the fact that Joe Biden is dead. I mean, politically, kind of dead. Okay, so he's still living and taking in breath. He's still being pumped up with all kinds of drugs so that he can function on a normal, regular basis. He's still going to bed at around 3:30 or 4 o'clock. But politically speaking, his era is dead and done, because as you all know by now, on Sunday afternoon, it was announced on Twitter, which is ridiculous in and of itself that he announced it on Twitter, but he put out a one-page letter basically saying that he is stepping aside and he is not running for re-election and not representing the Democratic Party. Interesting thing about his initial letter is that it did not explicitly endorse Kamala Harris. That was the very first thing that I keyed in on, is he did not explicitly endorse Kamala Harris. And then everybody for about a half hour was like, oh my gosh, we're going to have an open Democratic convention in Chicago in August. This is going to be absolutely insane, absolutely unprecedented. But then he sends out a second tweet, again, 30 minutes after he released the letter, basically explicitly endorsing Kamala Harris. But why not say that in the initial letter? Did they really was that really an oversight? I just don't really see that as a possibility. But it was very telling that the letter also did not explain why he isn't running for re-election. He doesn't say that he's dropping out because he's too old. He doesn't say that he's dropping out because he's going to die from COVID. He doesn't say that he's dropping out because he's, senile or that he has some sort of disease, Parkinson's. He doesn't say that he's dropping out of the race out of, some sort of patriotic duty. He just says that he's stepping aside for the best interest of his party and the country, kind of, but it's ultimately because he has no pathway to victory. He doesn't say that explicitly either, and we can clearly see that he was pushed out. We'll certainly talk more about that in a second, but it was also very telling that he did this in a tweet. I mean, I understand we're in the social media era and there's a lot of things that kind of like circulate. That's a way that, news can kind of go around the globe immediately, but no press conference. No address from the Oval Office. I know that we're supposed to be getting one of those soon, but he didn't do any of that. He did it in a tweet. Now, I have a theory about this. Now, I can't substantiate this, and I doubt it'll ever be proven or disproven, but this is my theory about why. He is either unaware that this has happened, or at least initially, he was completely unaware that this happened, and I mean that literally, or they're straight up forcing his hand. So they wrote up the letter, they put his signature on there, and they're just like, this is what's going to happen, okay? It actually made me think of when, UFC president Dana White, and when the UFC will publicly announce fights between two fighters that have not signed their bout agreements yet, but it's forcing those fighters' hands because it's making them feel the public pressure of the public announcement to basically do whatever the machine wants to do. Now, roundly, Democrats all over the place were very, very excited about this. They're saying, oh, this is great for Joe Biden's legacy, and he's stepping aside. What a patriotic person. What an amazing person. And they all, essentially, every prominent Democrat currently in office and formerly in office, came out and endorsed Kamala Harris, except for the Obamas. And we'll have to watch and wait and see why. I don't think this is an angle for Michelle Obama, like I've already told you guys before. If Michelle Obama does come down out of the rafters at the DNC, she will smoke Donald Trump in the general election. I'm telling you right now, she'll win by 100 electoral college votes. She'll win by millions and millions and millions of votes. She's the most popular woman in America. But the sense I get is that she's not really a political creature, that she didn't really like being in the White House. So I don't really see that happening. But Democrats all over the place were very excited about this, obviously, because now they have a chance at winning. And then Republicans seem to be very, very excited at this news as well, because they see Kamala Harris in a lot of ways as worse than Joe Biden. But in my personal opinion, I don't think Republicans should get too excited, but we'll cover that here in just a second. Now, if I had to predict for you what I think actually happened, here, which led to this announcement, to this letter of Joe Biden stepping aside, I think that the Democratic elites and the Democrat donor class, I don't think that they tried to convince Joe Biden to step aside, or convince Jill, who is one of the most evil, horrible people in modern political life, basically doing this to her husband and keeping him upright. And I don't think they tried to influence Hunter to, try to influence Joe to, make the right decision for the country. I would bet that they threatened them. That they threatened Joe, Jill, Hunter, and the rest of the Bidens. That they threatened them. I think that they threatened that they would push, silently for the 25th Amendment while still in office and ruin his legacy, which would also ruin his ability to make money post-presidency, which would obviously, that's obviously very important to Biden and the Biden brand and the Biden family. They've been going around picking up bags of cash ever since Biden became a senator back in his late 20s. I bet they threatened Jill Biden, who seems to be a megalomaniac of an extreme degree, that she would no longer have a public-facing profile, that she would not be allowed to basically do anything post-presidency. I bet they threatened Hunter with the ability that, hey, we can make sure that you end up in prison. I bet you more than anything that they guaranteed Hunter that if Joe Biden stepped aside, that they would keep him out of prison. Regardless of if he's convicted or any of those types of things, that they would find a way to make sure that he was not, in fact, going to end up inside of a prison cell. I also bet that they assured Joe that he will make tens of millions of dollars, if not more, post-presidency via his foundation and via money flowing through his presidential library or something like that. I don't think that the Bidens got together and decided, there's not really a pathway to victory. We're getting out of here. I think that they absolutely forced the guy out. So what we have, guys, now in reality is we have the first diversity, equity, and inclusion candidate for president in the United States history to represent a major political party. That's Kamala Harris. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Kyle, that sounds awfully racist or sexist to say. Well, let me take you in the Wayback Machine to when then candidate Joe Biden explained why exactly he selected Kamala Harris to be his VP and running mate. So this is a quote from a CNN Univision debate that they did in Washington, D.C. "If I'm elected president, my cabinet, my administration will look like the country. And I commit that I will, in fact, appoint a woman to be vice president." And then when the short list of his VP candidates came out, guys, not only were they all women, because he said that was going to be the case, they were all black women. So I couldn't find an exact quote of when he said, nope, I'm not considering anyone that's not a black woman. I'm definitely going to have a black VP, a black female VP. But that was what every signal pointed to. And that's DEI, guys. That is where you artificially limit the candidate pool that you're going to select from based on immutable characteristics. And he straight up said, every male will not be considered. You're disqualified from consideration. And also, every male and female that is not at least part black will not be considered for this either. It's DEI. And with that, that being that Harris is the first DEI candidate for president to represent a major political party, Kamala Harris, might also be the single most unimpressive and least accomplished candidate to represent a major political party in modern American history. And some of you might say, well, what about Donald Trump? He had no political accomplishments before that. But he was one of the most famous people on planet Earth. He was a billionaire. He had done a bunch of things in the business world. This was an accomplished human being. Some people have talked about J.D. Vance being announced as a VP. Like, wait a minute, he's in his late 30s. He's only been in Congress for, less than 2 years as a United States senator. But he graduated from Yale. He worked his way through Yale Law School. He was very successful in the business and the tech sector. He wrote a best-selling book that sold millions of copies that was then turned into a movie. And then he ran a highly contested Senate campaign and became a senator representing the state of Ohio. So very, very accomplished. But now let's look at Kamala Harris. Okay. So at Howard University, she gained a reputation for being a bad student and also a fraternity house whore. And keeping in line with her, penchant for being a skank, she got her start in politics by banging then Speaker of the California Assembly, Willie Brown, who appointed her to the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, and then later appointed her to the California Medical Assistance Commission. So she got both of those jobs, not because of her qualifications, but because she was blowing the guy. Then she became the district attorney of San Francisco because she ran a campaign mostly focusing on, wait for it, the fact that she was indeed non-white and a woman. Then she became the Attorney General of California because no Republican will ever actually have a shot at being beating a Democrat, in that hellhole that was once known as the great state of California. Then she won the U.S. Senate seat representing California by campaigning in a race where no Republicans were even on the general election ballot. So she essentially ran unopposed, once she got to the end. Then she ran such a horrifically bad campaign for president of the U.S. back in 2020 that she actually had to drop out before the California primary because all of the polling showed that she was going to get absolutely skunked in the state where she proudly served previously, or was serving as U.S. Senator, and then previously as Attorney General and DA of San Francisco. Then, as we've already covered, she was selected by Joe Biden, a man who she claimed was a sexual assaulter and racist. to run with him as VP because she was, in fact, non-white and a woman. So, to summarize, her most noted accomplishments are being a side chick whore who never won a truly contested political race, being plucked out of relative obscurity because of her immutable characteristics of being a non-white woman, and being completely ineffectual in her job as vice president, essentially failing at anything that was even vaguely important. But did I mention she's a black woman? Did I forget to mention that? Because again, that seems to be her one claim to fame and claim to any type of job that she might want moving forward. Now, if you guys think that Trump is just going to automatically destroy Kamala Harris and win in a landslide because her polling numbers are somehow lower than Joe Biden's, and he's the least popular president in modern history and she's the least popular vice president in modern history and all that type of thing, I just got to tell you guys, I think you've got another thing coming. Kamala Harris might be a complete dunce, okay? But Republicans would do well to not forget that Democrats' propensity to vote blue no matter who is incredibly strong. And if just look at, they put Joe Biden up in 2020 and he was a terrible candidate then. And again, with even all the chicanery that a lot of you claim went down, and even though it wasn't proven in court, he beat Donald Trump by millions and millions of popular votes and he skunked him in the general election or in the electoral college. And if you add that to Democrats' slavish devotion to intersectionality, Kamala becomes a real threat to actually win this thing because they want the first female president. They tried with Hillary, but now they're just going to add someone who is, part black, part Indian. Like they want that. They want to check those boxes because those things are incredibly important to them. And we can see this because in less than 24 hours after Joe Biden's announcement and subsequent endorsement of Kamala Harris, they raised close to $50 million for Kamala Harris's campaign. Close to $50 million. And that wasn't from like 5 or 6 donors. This was from a lot of small donors. $50 million in less than 24 hours, guys. And that's continued since Sunday. Now, one of the main problems that this Kamala Harris, running campaign poses for Republicans, there's actually a couple. So the first one is they have spent a year. Republicans have spent a year. Trump has spent a year attacking Joe Biden, mainly for his ineptitude and his senility. And now they have to shift their attacks entirely to focusing on Kamala. And you might think, well, she was part of the administration. Yes, but she's a completely different human being. But the second main problem, and this is the larger issue, is that the entire news cycle, even with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, has been focused on how bad Joe Biden is as a president, how bad his poll numbers are, how bad he did at the debate. And a lot of people have said that if the election is a referendum on Biden, this is like a big, a Ben Shapiroism. If the election is a referendum on Biden, then Biden loses. But if the election is or becomes a referendum on Trump, then Trump loses. The problem now, guys, and you really have to think soberly about this, is that Kamala Harris is a relatively unknown person on the national side. So she could, and I think Democrats will make sure that she operates like quote unquote generic Democrat. Now, if you don't immediately understand why that's problematic or why I brought it up, I'm going to urge you to do this when you can safely do so. Don't do it while you're driving down the road, but go to Google or your preferred search engine and search generic Democrat versus Trump polls. Generic Democrat versus Trump polls. Because as we see in those types of polls, and this has been this way from the very beginning of this election cycle, generic Democrat beats Donald Trump, basically across the board. Beats him in every swing state and beats him nationally. So the Democrats are going to do everything they can to make sure that Kamala Harris is not out in front too much, not in the limelight, unless they're talking about her as this transformative, groundbreaking, ceiling-shattering female black candidate. They're going to try to make this entire election a referendum on Trump. And I'm not sure that Trump will have the discipline to get out of his own way over the next, 100 days or so. because, he's a showman, and it's easy to, watch what Joe Biden did at that debate. And then just basically Trump just disappeared and went and golfed for a week and kind of let the Democrats try to eat each other alive. He can't do that now. This is a real race all of a sudden. And Republicans out there need to remember that it's not about how we view the Democratic candidate, but how the majority of potential Democratic voters and, lean blue independent voters will be motivated to vote against Donald Trump. Because I think back to, ancient history in 2020, when Donald Trump would have these huge rallies, tens of thousands of people showing up to arenas and to these outdoor events. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, only a few hundred people are showing up to these Biden rallies, but look at all these people showing up in the Trump rallies. And yet Biden easily won. And again, you can claim it was stolen and, these drop boxes and, I watched a documentary that proves blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what, guys? It wasn't proven in court. So until further notice, we just have to assume that there wasn't enough chicanery in the 2020 election that would have overturned the election and actually made it go for Trump. So Biden just won. Okay. And Biden won even though he was an addled old fart to begin with, because Trump was the better candidate, but Biden ended up winning. All of us thought, hey, we can see right here before our very eyes that Biden is not altogether there. He's very old. He's slurring his speech. He's had a very unimpressive career in politics, and politics is essentially the only real job he's ever had. But again, it doesn't matter what we think about it, because you only get to vote once. So whether you're holding your nose and voting for Trump, or whether you are literally, as I said last week, swimming through lava to vote for Trump, it still only counts once. And also, we might think that Kamala Harris is an unimpressive dolt of a human being that just spews out a constant stream of unintelligible nonsense, and it might be true, but low IQ or blue no matter who voters will just say, well, she's just a little quirky. And then they will fundraise for her, campaign for her, and then vote for her. So we have to be very, very careful about thinking this race is over. It's not over by a long shot. Hey guys, real quick. Here recently, one of my family members was telling me about how they partnered with another family and they bought some beef from this local cattle producer. And when they got the beef, it was unbelievably terrible. And I can tell you this from experience, because they made me some beef ribs from that animal and they were terrible. And they even gave me some steaks and some ground, and it was basically inedible. I couldn't believe how bad it was. And they ended up finding out that the person killed an old bull or something like that, and just the meat was old and tough and awful. And that's just what happens when you don't have a quality cattle operation that you can trust to give you a quality beef product on the back end. And that's, guys, why I want to introduce you to the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, my friends at Primal Beef. So Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that has partnered with Jocko Willing to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from some of these other cattle operations where you're going to end up getting bad beef? This operation is all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no mRNA ever, no vaccines ever. And after slaughter, this is a big deal. The beef is dry aged, and then it's hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another great thing about it. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride knowing that your purchase will help to put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. If you're not salivating yet, it's probably because you're a communist. Don't be a communist. Try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle, that's my first name, to get 10% off of your order. The great thing about that promo code is you can stack that on other deals as well and get all this money off. Again, that's primalbeef.com, promo code Kyle, that's Kyle, to get 10% off your order. All right, so guys, I want to transition just giving you a bunch of random, shotgun style thoughts here. There's a lot of thoughts here. First one. Republicans should make a show of trying to invoke the 25th Amendment. Okay, there's no chance that they're going to be able to get it through. There's no chance that they're going to actually be able to get Biden removed from office, but they need to basically scream this from the mountaintops, okay? Because the reality is you're telling me that Biden is not healthy enough to run for president, but he is healthy enough to be president right now. Make it make sense. Explain it to me like I'm 5. And the reality is for years now, he is not and should not have been operating as president of the United States. He should not have even been the figurehead, but that's what he's done. Okay. And so Republicans should point that out to an extreme degree. Also, this epic collapse of Joe Biden, which by any definition is an epic collapse of his presidency, this solidifies him as the worst president in modern American history. So Jimmy Carter, in his old age, he can now pass on at some point to the afterlife, knowing that he has finally been supplanted. Joe Biden, again, the media is trying to do this rejiggering of what's actually happened over the last several years, what we've seen with inflation, what we've seen with what's happened on the international stage, and what life is like for Americans now versus what it was like in the first certainly 3 years of a Trump presidency, solidifies him as one of the most ineffectual but most damning presidents of all time, because he has had a tremendous impact. It just so happens that that impact has been incredibly, incredibly negative. Another thing is that I keep hearing about how this recent debate against Trump was when everyone found out for the first time that Joe Biden was a senile, feckless old fart that we couldn't have possibly known until this exact moment. I remember the shock and awe of people on Twitter, these liberals, these, blue no matter who Democrats that were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea Joe Biden was like this. But guys, we knew this in 2019 when he was running for president, and then when he was still running for president in 2020, and then when he actually won and then took office at the beginning of 2021. He's only just deteriorated further. But he has looked this way for the entirety of his presidency and the run-up to his campaign for the presidency. I mean, this was a cover-up that everyone who was paying attention while having a functioning brain could actually see. I remember having conversations with people in 2020 that were intending to vote for Joe Biden and being like, guys, he's senile. He can barely speak. He has an unimpressive track record, but the dude can barely speak. And you're telling me that no one knew this until this first debate, this go round during the campaign? Like, come on. How dumb do you think we are? Also, how often have we heard it? Republicans are a threat to democracy, which again, we're a constitutional republic, guys. Get with the program. But Republicans are a threat to democracy. We have to defeat Trump because democracy is on the line. So let's go ahead and recap. The Democrat elites and the Democrat donor class disregarded the votes of 14 million people that cast their ballots for Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries this time around. And they disregarded the donations and the support of all the small donors to push out the sitting president from running for reelection. And Republicans are the ones attempting to subvert democracy. And the Democrats literally did every backhanded thing they could to keep RFK Jr. from being a serious challenge to Joe Biden during the Democratic primaries. They got him basically blocked, made him run as a third-party candidate. And I think it's because they knew that RFK Jr. would have gained a monumental amount of support in the primary. Even if he didn't end up winning the nomination, it would have been enough to really peel off a ton of support for Joe Biden. And you're telling me Republicans are the ones attempting to subvert democracy? Again, guys, the only reason any of this is going on is because Joe Biden was lagging in the polls. So let's say that the polls were showing that Joe Biden was within the margin of error or showing Joe Biden winning, right? If that's what the polls were showing right now, they would not have taken him out of this race. Joe Biden would still be in this race. So what the Democrats are telling you, what they're communicating to you and showing you is that they are completely okay with a mentally addled and senile man running the country right now and running for reelection as long as he would be reelected anyway. It's only when he became useless to their political cause that they took him out back and shot him. That's essentially what happened. Another thing, you know how we know that this was all coordinated well in advance? Because, and this is a little known fact, not many people are talking about it. All of the chair people of the Democratic Party, so these are the chairperson for the state of Oklahoma, for the state of Wyoming, for the state of New Mexico, for the whatever, all of the chair people essentially immediately came out in support of Kamala Harris. Not a single one of them questioned her or her ability to serve or anything like that. Or, hey guys, let's just open this up. Let's do a new primary, or let's, have an open convention and really figure out who the best person is going to be. None of them did that. They were all ready to go. They were all in line. And you saw every prominent Democrat currently in office or no longer in office come out and support her almost immediately, except for the Obamas. This wasn't a shock to any of them. No one expressed shock that this was happening. It's like they already knew it was going to happen. Also, as I mentioned last week, you guys simply do not hate the mainstream media enough. Because immediately after this announcement, immediately you could see the mainstream medias and the Democratic parties, but I repeat myself, their initial plan of attack. Trump is too old. Kamala is the young and energetic pick. But guys, these were the same people that as recently as Sunday morning of the same day that Joe Biden came out of the race, pulled himself out of the race, supposedly, they were assuring the electorate, they were assuring the American people, not only that Biden was up for the job for another 4 years, but that he was better than he's ever been. Mark Cuban, who has just made an absolute ass of himself over the last several years, showing his political cards. A week ago, he was tweeting about how Joe Biden is better than ever and his mental acuity is still high. And gosh, we're so glad we have him. And I can't wait to vote for him in November and all that. And his tweet almost immediately after Joe Biden pulled himself out of the race was, Father Time's undefeated. So did he age in the last week? Was there something magical that happened in the last week, Mr. Cuban? Also, in terms of Kamala Harris's accomplishments and fitness for the job of president, the entire mainstream media machine, and you can see this in their headlines, Washington Post, New York Times, the AP, everybody, they're only currently mentioning one thing: her immutable characteristics. She has a chance to become the first female president. She's close to being the first Black woman to be president of the U.S. She's the first person of South Asian descent to be a major party's candidate for president. That was one that I saw this morning because her family is from India, or part of her family is from India. That's all they can come up with. That's all they can come up with. Which again goes back to the Democratic Party playbook, and why they're so effective at this is because they will circle around anybody. I remember during the midterms, there was a dead person on the ballot that beat a living Republican because Democrats will vote blue no matter who, and they will always come home and be in line. Also, isn't it so interesting that the fact that Donald Trump was almost murdered on live television while at a campaign rally not even a week and a half ago at this point, that's been memory hold? Like, you would think the potential assassination, the near assassination of the odds-on favorite to win the White House being murdered, potentially murdered, right? Skipping out on dying by millimeters, that would still be dominating the news cycle. It's just gone. Like a fart in the wind, just gone. No one's talking about it anymore, right? People aren't even wondering, what's under Trump's bandage? What is he hiding? Was he actually shot? I mean, there's still some dorks out there, but everything has shifted. Everything has shifted away from that. It's just completely insane. Also, every part of this, guys, and I've talked about it a little bit throughout this, it just feels like a setup. I mean, I think if we go back to the debate that he had with Trump a little while back, I think that the Democratic inner circle made sure that Biden looked as bad as he did in that debate. I don't think that they were all shocked that it happened. They acted shocked, but I don't think that they actually were shocked. I think they made sure of this. I mean, they didn't shoot him up with the same stuff that they did for the last State of the Union address where he came off as mildly sentient. I think they wanted this to happen. I think they wanted to get all the way through, make sure Joe Biden was the solidified candidate, only to pull the old switcheroo and bring in Kamala Harris. Also, a lot of people are looking at polling right now, and they're like, oh, well, look at the polls between, Biden, Harris, and all that. Guys, I'm just going to tell you right now, I don't think that you should give any credence to a single national or swing state poll until September. I'm serious. Like, there's just too much that is in flux because, as of the recording of this, 9 days ago, 10 days ago, Donald Trump was almost murdered. Currently, as I'm recording this, the day before most of you guys are listening to it, we have the Secret Service director, Sheetal, who's in front of Congress right now, apparently giving a horrific performance, which, again, I don't think that's a bug as much as it is a feature of this woman. But I think that it's way too early to start looking at comparison polls, because Harris has not selected a VP candidate, which I don't think that, we should get too worked up about who she picks as VP. I don't think it's necessarily going to be something that changes the race, unless it's Shapiro from the state of Pennsylvania, which could take Pennsylvania off the board for the Republicans. But the guy's also a Jew, and Democrats hate Jews. So, there's all this kind of stuff going in, but there's just too much in flux. Harris hasn't done a public presser yet. They haven't started campaigning against Harris yet. The Harris team has not started turning their vitriol towards Trump in any way that isn't already singularly attached to Joe Biden. We don't have the Democratic convention that's happened. We don't know if they're going to try to solidify Kamala Harris as the candidate before they get into the convention. No matter what party and no matter who's been elected, there's always a post-convention bump, no matter what. And so, guys, this convention is in August. So we have to wait for all of the dust to settle. All of it. There's way too much dust. Just hang on and start looking at the polls again in September. Also, if Kamala Harris does, God forbid, become the next president of the United States, you can expect to see incredibly liberal and murderous policies put forth on abortion. Kamala Harris is one of the most extreme people on the abortion subject matter that we have in public life. And again, the Democratic platform on abortion is abortion for any reason at any point of pregnancy and paid for by taxpayer dollars. Kamala Harris is certainly for all of those things. Need I remind you that she was the first vice president but the first vice president to actually visit an abortion facility while in office. She loves killing babies. It's like one of her favorite things. And again, I said a second ago, we shouldn't get too worked up about who she picks for VP and all that. And, kind of the same thing. I didn't think people needed to get too worked up about JD Vance, because JD Vance is brought in. Again, he's in his late 30s. He's kind of seen as the guy that can keep the MAGA mantle thing going. And look, if Donald Trump is elected, then 4 years from now, JD Vance is obviously very viable to take over and win the presidential nomination for the Republicans. That's why I said in a previous episode months ago that I think that Ron DeSantis may have missed out on his opportunity, because everything is about timing. Everything is about timing, because he's going to no longer be the governor of the state of Florida 2 years from now, right? So when the midterms are happening, that's whenever he's going to be leaving office. So for 2 years leading up to the 2028 election, can't believe we're even talking about it, for 2 years, he's going to basically be a ghost. And so if Donald Trump's in the White House and JD Vance is his VP, he's going to be out front on a lot of different things. So to all you DeSantis supporters out there like me, it's a little bit of a disappointing development, but hey, a lot of things can change. Things could change in the next day, much less the next 4 to 5 years. And my last point that I want to go through here is we are perhaps in the most dangerous time in recent history as a nation and as a world, because the United States is still the dominant hegemonic structure here in the entire world. And that's because all of our enemies around the globe know that Joe Biden will at least be the president until January of next year, and that he is completely a lame duck at this point. They know, because the Democrats have basically said, Joe Biden's basically said, I'm not up to the job. I'm so not up to the job that I can't even run a campaign and the country at the same time. And so what is China going to do? What is Iran going to do? What is North Korea going to do? What are the Russians going to do? I hope not. But over the next several months, I think that we're going to see a lot of movement from those entities that I just described, but also from fundamentalist Islamist groups, because they know this is our opportunity. And, if Kamala Harris becomes president, then they can just kind of continue on doing everything that they want to do. But they are scared to death of the fact that Donald Trump might be president. There was, reporting that there was an active threat that Iranians were trying to kill Donald Trump here on American soil, which obviously signals that they are terrified at the prospect of Donald Trump becoming president again. Because when he was president, he essentially, through sanctions, bankrupted that nation. And then when Joe Biden takes over, all of a sudden that nation is washing cash again. I mean, they're just absolutely awash in cash. They're Scrooge McDucking into their money all of the sudden. And so there's a whole lot that can go on. I know that this is very anxiety inducing for a lot of people, But I do want to give you, because I know I normally do scripture from the top of the show, and I kind of, made fun of 2 Kamala 4:20 and all that kind of stuff. But I want to read Psalm 22:28 to you. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. So guys, again, let me remind you, God does not need America. And just because America has been a dominant hegemon for 2 centuries does not mean that God is specifically blessing the United States so that he can get done what he needs to get done. He can get done what he needs to get done regardless of what's going on. Need I remind you that some of the places where the gospel is being accepted to an extreme degree are places where missionaries can't get into like very easily at all. So the church in Iran is exploding. And do you think they just have Christian street preachers in Iran? No, they would all be beheaded or set on fire or tortured to death or thrown off roofs. Like that these things aren't happening, but the Holy Spirit is revealing the Son, Jesus, to people in their dreams, to Muslims, to devout Muslims, and to terrorists in their dreams. And so you're telling me that we need America somehow so that the gospel can be spread? Again, we're living in a post-Christian America. Like sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, different parts of the Middle East. These are the places where Christianity is exploding. Why? Because God rules over all. The triune God is actually operating in the world that we are in right now. Because when Jesus died on the cross, that actually did count for those that would accept that free gift of grace. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. Guys, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy campaign season. It already has been one of the most bumpy campaign seasons, but we win in the end. So just relax. All right, guys, before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. We've got our donation link in there as always, but also, again, just a reminder, if you want to apply to potentially work on our social media team, again, you have to be a U.S. citizen, you have to have done this before, and you have to be sold out to the Undaunted Life cause. Go to Undaunted.Life/social. That is in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.